Last time on the Sith Clone Wars, the Starforge rose. Thanks to the turncoat Sith, Sola Grey, the Republic was able to apprehend the super weapon and begin constructing a future war effort for themselves. Sola Grey herself, after betraying the Sith due to nearly being killed by the rebellious Corel Sue and the monstrous Darth Malgus, found herself refuge on the Jedi homeworld of Octu. Her contributions to the Republic war effort, through revealing the location of the Forge, was useful, but her treatment with the Jedi never depicted such grace. On the front lines of combat, Anakin and Natabre, the Jedi Masters of Ahsoka and Zala, remained focused on the objective, destroying the Sith. Unbeknownst to them, after the death of Exar Kun, another Sith rose to the ranks, a master of the dark arts, Lord Valkorin. The rising Sith Emperor presented a calm and strong mind, compared to the pugnacious Exar. With a new leader atop their ranks, he turned all attention towards a perfect counter to the Republic, a larger and more effective battleship. Against the rebellious population of Coruscant, Valkorin started the construction of a new shipyard. Though rebels on the surface led by a local hero named Joral would stand in the way of his efforts. Due to the war heating up and Mandalore providing a stronghold to pass through for the Republic, Anakin, Natabre, Ahsoka, and Zala pushed across the eastern quadrant of the galaxy. They, with this aggressive push, marched through Sith territory until, in the middle of one of their engagements, Anakin was thrown into hyperspace by Revan, who crashed into him. When they landed on Dathomir, Skywalker fought off the Sith Lord and encountered a ghost from his past, named Darth Maul. Thankfully, their engagement was cut short, and Skywalker was able to retreat. After Anakin departed, Lord Revan had a curse lifted by Mother Talzin. Emperor Valkorion's several thousand-year torment came to an end with her command. At Skywalker's return to his fleet, he was informed of the shipyards at Coruscant, and with his best friend, dispatched to the fallen capital. Ahsoka and Zala were quickly transported away from their masters' fleet back to Ahch-To, where their training could continue until Anakin and Natabre returned. Once the two Jedi sneakily arrived on Coruscant, they were met with scorched earth. The planet had been reduced to rubble, but their mission remained imperative. Surprisingly, Anakin and Revan reunited, this time as allies, to fight back against the Sith. In a heroic push, Jedi and rebels fought against the Sith Empire, leading to the total destruction of the shipyard above the planet and the believed erasure of the Sith battleship blueprints. But celebration did not last. Valkorin's flagship appeared through the atmosphere and he dropped a bombardment onto the rebels. In the counterattack, Natabre was struck and nearly died. Skywalker was able to get her into a sarcophagus tube to protect her. He rushed her away from Coruscant and back to his fleet. Admiral Coburn, his fleet and division admiral, sent word back to Octu. Natabre, in a medically induced coma, received some treatment before leaving, and all the way back on the Jedi homeworld, before they could actually return, news was passed to Zala. After being mistreated by her peers prior to becoming Natabre's student, she was faced with what she presumed to be the death of her closest friend, her master. In both fear of being abandoned and agony of heart, Zala departed from Ahch-To in the middle of the night. Our season begins on the Jedi Sanctuary at Ahch-To. It had been exactly 3 days since the semi-successful operation at Coruscant. There hadn't been news from the freedom fighters that called that planet their home. If they had won, no one knew. If they had been slaughtered, as was presumed at this moment, then still, no one knew. Anakin's thoughts lingered on his friends. Joral and Revan did so much work to help him. They made sure he was free, and now the fate of his closest ally remained uncertain. Jedi and clone medics present on the planet were doing everything they could to heal her, from the burn wounds across her back to the deep cuts across her skin, or the concussion that left her in this comatose state. They were unsure if she could be saved. Natabre and Anakin had done so much for the people of Coruscant. Skywalker knew that he shouldn't waste her sacrifice lamenting her absence. She wouldn't want that, and he knew that assertively because she had told him that. He still didn't know what to do though. Ahsoka and he spoke over the last 3 days about the losses of Natabre and Zala. Truthfully, they were more concerned with Zala because she wasn't in a coma. They could do something about that. She was just lost amongst the stars. The tracker on the starship she took was disabled, leaving the Jedi without any chance to identify her location. The High Council did not press Anakin for answers, knowing that he couldn't know due to his situation on Coruscant. The last he saw of the 2 apprentices, they were being escorted back to Ahch-To, while Admiral Coburn maintained a strategic position at Borgo Prime after the victory they had with Skywalker, Morden, and Master Saesee Tin. The biggest raise for concern was what Zala could be doing now. She was just a Jedi Padawan. So many strategists weren't exactly overly concerned, but the biggest draw was the fact that she had been at System 9Z1, where the Starforge was currently located. Tarkin accused her of treachery, and Coburn again in this discussion backed his Jedi ally. These deliberations would continue to circle themselves in a loop that seemingly never ended. Anakin knew none of this. He had consoled his apprentice because she was devastated over these losses. He reminded Ahsoka assuringly that these things happen in war, and that this was a war different than anything they had ever seen in their lives. This wasn't to say that Anakin wasn't struggling, but he needed to be a strong resource for Ahsoka. Neither of the 2 of them could rely on their other half, whether that being the other master or the other apprentice, and so they had to form a new whole one together. No one knew when either Zala or Natabre would return to them. They just had to hope that things would go positively for their friends, as they redirected their focus to themselves. Aside from the emotional wreck Anakin was when he returned to their sanctuary, he had the genuine benefit of those close around him. Jocasta Nu had been a firm hand of guidance. She didn't convey deep emotional support, but she was calming and meditative. This helped Anakin retrace steps that were once covered with Natabre. The 2 of them made a lot of work in the past year of this war. Anakin was no longer at risk of repeating the Tusken incident, and now that's where he was now. No longer was he plagued by a Sith Lord hidden on Dathomir. No longer was the war knocking on his door. He had lost so much, but he had found serenity inside the Force. On the Garden Island, where the younglings and Padawans had been gathered for the entirety of the war, he sat quietly on a stone out by the ocean. He found his friend here many times before their first mission to Tython. He found home. It was created by memories, and they existed within his heart and his mind. Skywalker's eyes sat still, and with his hands outstretched, rocks and personal effects rotated around his body. He was one with the Force, and the Force was with him. His lightsaber looped in circles behind an assortment of other stones and his communication device, plus some other things that slipped off his belt during this meditation. Anakin recited a mantra in his mind. It was something Natabre and he created during one of their missions following the incident at Thifera. I am a beacon of peace. The Force gives me knowledge through serenity. Harmonious and luminous beings are we. The Force is my guide. A smile sat gently on his face, and he was home. Being away from Octu for so many months took the life out of him, and he had barely realized it. This was a place where he had truly found himself, and came to grips with his purpose in this war. Without his dear friend Natabre, these ideas had to remain steadfast, potentially even evolve. Skywalker, as he finished another recital of the mantra, opened his eyes. He looked at each of the floating objects around him, and one by one they gently found home on the surface. He gathered his pieces up and planted them on his belt, before slipping his legs out from under him so that he could get up. As Anakin moved from his position, he startled himself. An individual was located not far from his position, someone he hadn't sensed. Their framed logo wasn't too large, so he assumed that it was another Padawan. He quietly got himself up and moved away. The other individual hadn't impeded. just found peace in a similar location to he. The night would slowly pass by. Anakin, unable to find sleep, would abandon a small hut that was set up for him. Overhead was a crescent moon and it looked beautiful, but it too represented the divide. As Anakin moved from his hut to a bundle of rocks at the top of a nearby hill on the island, he found the same figure. This time, they weren't meditating, but somehow just as sleepless as he. Anakin hadn't interacted with her before, but she was startled by his appearance. The individual was a turncoat, a former Sith, who helped lords conquer planets and get closer to the Starforge. However, her betrayal of their kind led to the Jedi securing the Forge itself. Perhaps one of the most consequential choices for the Sith in this entire conflict. Anakin apologized for having disturbed her and she accepted it, but expressed that there was no need for any apologies. She told Anakin that she was glad that they could finally meet one another. A confused Anakin outstretched his arm to shake her hand as she revealed her name to be Zala Grey. He asked if she were the one who got him to the Forge, and she nodded, but responded hesitantly, suggesting that he had done that himself. He grinned and shrugged his shoulders, a little arrogantly, then attributed it to his crew who did most of the heavy lifting. An awkward silence then fell on the two individuals, as Skywalker asked if she was having trouble sleeping, and she shrugged. She wasn't really much of a daytime person. The Jedi had kept an eye on her for the last several months since she arrived. They still didn't trust her because she was a Sith, which, fair enough, though Zala made an odd comment that caught Anakin completely off guard. She had a vision of him when she was still a Sith. She envisioned an overly large hulking brute of a Jedi, someone who mercilessly killed, and while this wasn't a combative Anakin standing before her, he didn't show any of those attributes from that vision. Anakin squinted and then found the words to say, suggesting that perhaps he hadn't progressed that far in his own training yet, but truthfully, it was a jarring vision. A stiffness, again, sat in the air, and Zala Grey thanked him for his efforts before shuffling away. It was a situation that left Anakin really confused. He didn't know what to think of that interaction. It was bizarre, but okay. He turned back and Zala Grey was already gone, which was perhaps a little creepy. Anyways, back to standing dramatically in the wind with his robes fluttering behind him. Octu provided a surreal level of comfort, and here, on this small perch over the crashing waves of this ocean world, Anakin relished in everything he could take from this peace. Out on Zaheth was Vaylin, who had otherwise been unsuccessful at utilizing the captured Republic communication relay station. One of the clones bugged the system before the Sith could access it. Valkorin supplied reinforcements to the scanner just before the Battle of Coruscant, but still, the engineers weren't able to get the technology to operate. The Republic didn't make a counter move on the system because there was no usage coming out of the station, assuming that a clone or Republic personnel had valiantly undone any work done on the station before their death. This assumption was right, for now. In the tree line, a Sith shuttle closed its wings in a firm landing sequence. Out from the vessel walked a group of red Praetorian guards. Their staves hung by their sides, and they parted the way, lining up in formation as their leader walked down the ramp of the ship. She wore a dark cloak, one that covered her head, and she stepped into the forest that had blasters aiming at her from all around. Vaylin stood with her lightsaber at the ready, and the woman's voice crawled out from under her cloak, asking why they would greet such a good friend with such hostility. The robes dropped and a familiar face was revealed. Vaylin bowed her head in respect, as Bastila smiled, telling the girl that was better. The Sith Lord stepped forward, and with a wave of her hand, the Praetorians picked up and started behind her. Vaylin sidestepped before getting beside Bastila and demanding answers. Why was she here? Where had she been for the past year? Did she know of the developments over Coruscant? Bastila was surprised by the lack of transparency between father and daughter, something likely shared between Valkorin and his sons. Perhaps they didn't know everything she knew, and this was at the bare minimum an inkling of trust that Bastila could have for the Sith Emperor. She explained ever so briefly that she'd been operating behind enemy lines with this Praetorian unit. Their work was not limited to Jedi or Confederacy. She was gathering resources because Sith commanders were so inefficient at their jobs. Bastila revealed from her cloak a small cylindrical device and handed it to Vaylin. She told the girl to plug it into the main control station and see if the virus is eradicated. Not for nothing, Vaylin was slightly confused why she had been cut out of this information by her father Valkorin. It was an unknown alliance, formed back before the days of Exar Kun. It was meant to remain a secret because it was done without Revan or Malik's knowledge. Valkorin and Bastila were allies. That's all anyone needed to understand. She wasn't quite a rabid cur, but she would suffice for their desires for galactic expansion. Vaylin stepped up to the control console and plugged the device in. The system shut down before reviving itself with a hiss and a jittering of commands. The long-range scanner was activated, but before Vaylin could target anyone in particular, one of the Praetorians planted their fat finger in her path, tapping on the computer and activating the scanner. Above them, the sound of the creaking satellite dish could be heard. It twisted left and shifted itself upwards before locking into place and reading transmissions from nearby star systems. Bastila informed Vaylin that this wasn't the key to winning the war. These were just pieces to the cake. If they had any chance in defeating the Jedi, Bastila lightly tapped the younger woman's forehead. Then they needed to have a more expansive mindset. Vaylin and her brothers were acting as cogs. They should search for more effective uses of their skills, or they might just be replaced. Outside of Mandalore, a shuttle carrying an injured Plo Koon broke through the atmosphere and landed just next to turret installations. The Jedi Master again apologized to his troopers for bringing them to Malachor. It was a mistake on his part. The Duchess, dressed in her Mandalorian armor, greeted her ally, asking if he was alright. The missing arm was an indicator that something terrible had happened. Plo nodded his head, regretfully informing her that they had gone too far. His own skills with the blade weren't as grand as he once believed they were. He would do more to hone in his skills. The Sith at Malachor, Malgus, he thought his name was, had completely decimated them in a surprise attack. Luckily, there weren't many casualties, but Plo took this loss especially heavily. There never should have been any losses because they never should have left their protective circle. It was a quest for knowledge that should be abandoned. Satine moved to Plo's side and took him under the shoulder, informing him that they would get him a new arm. It was time to learn from the past. The future awaited them. It was meant to be uplifting. He concurred, following her into the defended gates of the Mandalorian capital. From the planet he just abandoned, Lord Malgus quietly investigated the temple at Malachor. He was impressed with his own show of strength against the Jedi Master. The report he sent back to Valkorin was at least satisfactory, so he needn't concern himself with the Emperor's thoughts, though not everything had to be shared with Valkorin. The temple was still accessible, but only by a master and apprentice. The Sith Lord grinned. He wouldn't touch it now, but Malgus would find the appropriate pupil for this gift from the past. On Ahch-To, daylight crested over the rock formations, protecting the garden island from the heavy seas. These natural groupings of large boulders stopped the sound of crashing waves from infiltrating the youngling camp. Anakin was last to wake. Ahsoka was out with all the other younglings and Padawans, finding herself a place to call home among their ranks. Anakin knew that his student would be okay without Natabre and Zala. She was resilient. He watched her from a distance and then caught a glance at that Sola Grey individual. She was assisting Master Jocasta as a temple guard mirrored her movements. Skywalker knew that Sola Grey wouldn't hurt a fly, at least now in this form. It was a simple contrast for Anakin and very easy in his mind to delineate. Natabre was someone who knew her place in this galaxy, an open-minded Jedi who believed firmly in the code and worked with what she didn't understand with patience and grace. Sola Grey, at least from Anakin's first interaction and perspective of her, hadn't found her place in the galaxy. She yearned for belonging, and the Jedi were too skeptical to give it to her. In a way, it reminded Skywalker of Zala. Anakin fastened his robes over his shoulder and joined Ahsoka with a group of younglings. They were all excited to talk to Commander Tano and, of course, General Skywalker. Their inquisitive little minds had questions that needed answers, and the two Jedi were obliged to give them. But first, their training had to come. It was during this day on Octu, the first day back where he was semi-functional on the Garden Island, that Anakin learned the whole dynamic shared between the Jedi on this planet. They weren't just restarting what had been established on Coruscant. This was a truer understanding of the Force and how the Jedi operated with it. Oppo Rancisis and Terra Nube were leading guided instructions with Jocasta Nu, overseeing the entire grounds of this new temple. She had found a number of holocrons, both new and old, for these lessons, and the Elder Masters, Sunube and Rancisis, were mostly teaching from memory. This was where Sola Grey earned the trust with the Jedi. She wasn't technically one of them, but she did everything to earn their trust, everything she could at least. She was open and communicative with each of them. She saw the importance of unity within Jedi ranks, and she just wished that it could be shared with her. Anakin, despite their very, very awkward conversation from the previous night, caught on to this because he was once that. He was limited to being an outcast, and he would make a more generous approach, something that Jocasta Nu silently scoffed at. The Elder Archivist may have been a sweet old lady, but she was stuck in her ways. Former Sith were not to become Jedi, no matter the transformation they made internally and thus externally. Skywalker could sense this bubbling change for Sola Grey, and he offered her a chance to shadow him and Ahsoka for the day. From what Anakin could tell, Sola Grey wasn't much older than himself, if not older, so it slowly became easy for the two of them to get along. It just took some work and ironing out the awkwardness. That vision that had been referenced the night before sat in both of their minds, but slowly, the fear that had consumed Sola Grey as a Sith vanished. She was able to relax herself and trust that the Jedi she had surrendered herself to wouldn't hurt her. Sola Grey had been playing the survivor's game. Now Anakin gave her the avenue to being welcomed as a Jedi. He had gone through that path, he had rejected darkness, and he could sense the similarity. Being a Sith didn't include having friends, and after the situation with Coriel Sue's rebellious outburst on Lord Revan's flagship, Sola was extremely reluctant to trust. She had breached that barrier here on Ahch-To with the Chosen One and his apprentice. In deep space, a Jedi starship was picked up by an Imperial destroyer. The fighter was brought into the flagship by a tractor beam, and when the vessel landed, it was swarmed by Imperial guardsmen. Marco Ragnos walked from the main corridor to investigate this himself. He had remained away from the deliberations of what he called the Sith Congress. It was a band of blabbing fools, only haranguing their self-aggrandizements to a crowd of no one that cared. Marco loved a good back and forth, but the Sith Council were foolish in his eyes. As he stepped towards this vessel, his guards got angsty. He laughed at them and told them to loosen up. If he died, he died. The half-bred Dark Lord watched the cockpit of the ship flip open. On the inside was a girl. How peculiar. Her robes identified a Jedi, and as his men readied their weapons, he told them to silence their excitable minds. They hadn't caught prey. They stumbled upon a cure. The men looked to each other with a bumbling confusion, another one of Lord Ragnos' riddles. He walked with a hitch towards the girl and asked why she was here. Zala looked afraid, but certain in her mind. She told the individual she was scared, which Marco understood, raising a hand to help her from her ship. He told the crew to investigate for trackers. They listened, as the two of them walked away from the hangar bay. He placed his hand on her shoulder lightly and guided her through easy questions, twisting the dagger of darkness deeper into her soul. Zala found answers very easily, intentionally. She understood what Marco was saying to her, and she listened to his hypnotic voice as if she were in a trance. Zala wasn't afraid of him, when somewhere deep inside she believed that she should be. The confusion that drove her away from Octu was uplifted by Marco in this moment. He could understand her grievances and he sympathized with her uncertainty. Lord Ragnos and Zala walked side by side until they entered the bridge, where they sat down at a communication table. Marker's bridge wasn't designed like a traditional vessel. There was a room for briefings, and just beyond down the catwalk was the front of the bridge, a very simple design that he preferred. He asked his child to explain all of her troubles, and Zala slowly rambled them off, not in succession, but pieces to a puzzle that the Sith Lord quickly assembled in his mind. He smiled the further she went as she delivered intel that the Sith Emperor would find value in. Zala explained that she felt some semblance of belonging. Her master, Natabre, was a good person. She cared a lot, but she was dead. Zala's eyes watered as she explained that she wasn't supposed to hear it, but she accidentally overheard Master Jocasta explaining Master Morden's situation. Natabre was apparently dead before they even left Coruscant, and Zala couldn't bear the idea of being left behind again. Jedi weren't permitted to train two at a time. It was against the code, and sure, rules were broken during the war, but Skywalker, the only other instructor she semi-trusted, wouldn't be allowed to train her because of the Council. So instead of getting paired up with another Jedi that would see her mishaps as a flaw on her character, she left. Marker had all day, so he was able to learn that Zala had once stood up for bullied children in the aftermath of the Sith returning to Coruscant. Instructors always saw Zala as the aggressor because she was one of the oldest kids in the middle of scrums. This brought up tension between her and the Jedi instructors on Ahch-To, but Natabre, she was a good master. She was just... Zala stumbled over her words as she started to slowly sob. Marker got up and comforted her by kneeling by the chair and telling the young Jedi that she would be protected. Despite the propaganda spouted by the Jedi, the Sith would take her in and take care of her. She would have a family with them. She wiped tears from her eyes and he smiled, telling her that everything would be okay. She asked if she may stay with him, and Ragnos apologized, explaining that his post was too dangerous for her. But instead of remaining by his side, he had a very good friend that would willingly accept her in. Zala looked at him with concern, but his reassuring smile and tone promised her an audience with the Emperor Valkorion. Within the coming hours, she'd be sent to the Galactic Core to meet her new master. Back on Octu, where peace remained a constant within Jedi ranks, the sound of starships exiting from hyperspace could be heard. Anakin, Sola Grey, and Ahsoka were standing with a group of younglings, and their eyes turned to the skies. A fear crossed over Anakin's heart, but at the sight of a singular Venator, he was no longer concerned. Their attention shifted back to the practice they were doing with the younglings. Sola was smiling and feeling more comfortable being herself. Ahsoka was getting the kids to laugh, and Anakin was overseeing all of it with pride. He felt good. There was still a hole in his heart, but he felt right, and that was a start. He didn't have to turn everything around instantaneously. He just needed to have the desire to make the change, especially without his friend. His eyes turned up towards the Temple Island, where Natabre was currently being kept. She was with a couple of other wounded Jedi, hidden inside the peak of their ancient temple. There was a view of the ocean from there, and if she did unfortunately get taken by the Force, then it would be the most peaceful place for her to be. Anakin did not want to lose his best friend, but knowing that she was in a peaceful state at this moment brought him comfort. As his thoughts remained on Natabre, something broke his concentration. Cannons launched from the Venator and the ground erupted into blazes of fire and ash. Younglings scattered into various directions as Anakin watched Jocasta Nu and a class of students get detonated by a flash of green and blue. He yelled out, watching the vessel creep lower towards the surface. Anakin searched for a speeder and told Sola and Ahsoka to get everyone to the shoreline behind the rock formations. They could at least kind of hide there. He gripped his speeder and revved the engines and ripped towards the Temple Island. Inside the main bridge on the Venator, there was not a Sith. There were not separatists. It was Captain Tarkin. His hands were pinned behind his back, and he ordered his own men to continue firing. Some of the crew knew this was happening. Others did not. Very soon after their arrival, a few of the clones on deck tried to stop this madness, before Tarkin executed them himself. The bridge itself was sealed, and Tarkin promised a future for the Republic that did not involve the Jedi. The Spat cannon on the Venator loaded up and fired directly into the Temple Island, shredding through caretakers, Jedi homes, and starships alike. Dozens of Jedi were strewn about, dead or mortally wounded. Skywalker pulled his speeder up the side upon his arrival to avoid the beam of light. He watched another duo of Jedi die in the process as he looked over his shoulder. Cannons were still firing into the Garden Island. Anakin was now left with a choice. He could try and save Natabre, or try and save the others who had a better chance at surviving. His heart was stuck, and he watched a class of younglings get launched into oblivion. Skywalker jumped off the speeder and jumped onto a Jedi starfighter. He shoved the throttle in before the engines could fully even ignite. The ship struggled to flip out of the right gear, but Anakin pushed the vessel so hard it jumped into the air. Some more clones attempted to stop Tarkin, but he was able to remind them that their brothers were dying because the Jedi did not know how to command. He was doing this for the Republic. They could have a fully automated army with the Starforge, but no, the Jedi didn't want to kill another star. Then, overwhelmingly, they voted to create starships so more clones could die. Their blood was on the hands of the Jedi Order. Some clones had the ability to stop themselves from turning against Tarkin, while the others were labeled as traitors and shot or stunned. As Tarkin turned back around from his little mutiny, a Jedi starship spun through the air, firing rounds into the bridge. The captain demanded that they shoot down that ship. He attempted to get the pilots to do anything, but none of the clones in the hangar bay wanted to kill Skywalker. In their eyes, he was one of them, and so were the rest of the Jedi. Explosions continued to sound off on the ground as the crew watched dozens of Jedi die by the minute. With everyone on the Garden Island going into hiding, another Spat cannon targeted the Temple Island, shredding the command center and leveling the original Jedi Temple, hidden within the Tree of Life. The history of the Ancient Order had been decimated. Skywalker continued to pepper the Venator, but nothing was getting through. He was getting frustrated due to his desperation. Luckily, the younglings, some of them, had been guided to a safe location. As Anakin continued to fire into the ship, another Venator appeared, and his heart sank further. But shots blew past him and hit Tarkin's flagship. Admiral Killian, the one Tarkin called a Jedi lover, was proving him right. The Republic Admiral wasn't standing for this, and he also happened to be in the area because he was delivering extra supplies to the Jedi Sanctuary. Anakin weaved between cannon fire as the clones inside the hangar bay evacuated. Admiral Killian ordered Tarkin to stand down, but he refused, sending many of the men on his bridge into a frenzy, but the captain refused to let them fail him. Those who remained loyal turned their weapons on Killian's Venator and opened fire. The new mutineers were shot on sight by Tarkin himself. An individual tried to fight him, but decades of refined training made him a vicious combatant, and he snapped the clone's neck in an instant. All the clones inside the flagship started to retreat, looking for escape pods or vessels to help them jump ship. Killian didn't want to do it, but the Spat cannon smashed down into the hull of the opposing Venator, and it started to lose its ability to hover. The ship dipped down hard and more cannons fired on it. Tarkin marched to the front of the bridge, holding on to the control panel and pressing buttons to fire the cannons. He wasn't going down without a fight. Killian and Skywalker continued to attack the vessel, but the bow dipped into the ocean, and before the ship could sink, the pressure split down the middle, sending Tarkin backwards into the crushing depths of the ocean. Admiral Killian would send a crew to investigate the wreckage and search for survivors, so that they could be tried or saved. Anakin spun his ship back around and landed on the Temple Island. He jumped out and ran up the massive hills, as he used his wrist to get into communication with his apprentice, who confirmed her safety. She also told him that Master Rancisis and Sola Grey were accounted for, but Terra Sinube and Jocasta Nu were unknown at the moment. Anakin thanked her as he continued his ascent. The further he got up the mountain, the harder it became for him to breathe. This wasn't even due to the air pressure changing, it was because of the sheer death he saw. The entire caretaker village was wiped out. The few Jedi inside the village at the time were dead. Some of them had survived, but they died of their injuries before they could be saved. Not a soul had survived the attacks on the Temple Island, but Anakin kept climbing. He had to see for himself. When he reached the perch Where the wounded were being kept before the attack, he fell to his knees. The Jedi and clone medics were plugging in alternative power sources into their patients' chambers. Natabre's heart rate was steady, and Anakin let out a deep breath. He asked if the medics were alright, and they were a little shaken, but overall, still breathing, which was good enough for them. The following hours would have news spreading out across the Republic. Masters Jocasta Nu and Terra Nube were killed in the bombing. Following the attack on the Jedi Temple a year before on Coruscant, the Jedi had 3,000 members left, survivors of that initial attack. 2,000 of them were Padawans or younglings. This attack had decimated that number. There were a few new recruits since the beginning of the war, but not a lot. So when the head count was finalized in the coming days, they would learn that only 950 of the Jedi on Ahch-To survived, leaving the entire Jedi Order with 1,400 or so Jedi in the entire galaxy. The worst part is, a solid number of the non-training Jedi were instructors, which were situated on Octu. They were there to help grow the next generation, as the warriors remained on the front lines. Now things were even more desperate than ever before for the Jedi Order because no one could train them. Most of the instructors were killed in the attack by Tarkin. When night fell on Octu, silence filled the air. Children were reminded of the trauma they spent the last year trying to get over. The Order was in shambles internally, and no one knew why Tarkin made this move. It blindsided everyone, and hearts were truly broken over the attack. The surviving instructor-level Jedi did everything they could to keep morale high, but even at this point, they could see the writing in the sand. The Jedi Order was bound to go extinct. Anakin spent the entire night walking to groups of younglings, consoling them and hugging them, promising each of the young Jedi that he would protect them. They would stop the evil that caused this and end the pain they felt. Those around him started to see Anakin as the true chosen one. He was among the youngest instructors on the island, and yet he was rallying everyone together as best as he could. He promised them a future that he didn't even know existed. All he did was lift spirits, until his very own was shattered. After mostly everyone was asleep, Anakin stumbled to a secluded area on the shoreline and fell to his knees. The night was dark, clouds hid the growing moon, and thus, light was very hard to find. Skywalker, on his knees, felt the sand surround his legs. He had never felt so lowly in his life. He heaved as if he were going to regurgitate, but nothing came out, and then he fell back just a little. He didn't know where he was, or who he was anymore. He couldn't even find tears to release. He kept losing everyone, first his mother, and then Padme and Obi-Wan, then Natabre probably, and Zala. Now the Order was in shambles. The attack, the Hellfire, it came from their own ranks. That was their own troopers, their own officers, their own alliance shifting to attack them. Anakin looked to the lifeless sky and pleaded for an end to the suffering. He asked for anyone out there to listen. He needed support, he needed someone. He was so broken, and his heart couldn't take any more tears. As silence ceased the day, overshadowing the words he whispered out to the galaxy, he felt warmth. Typically, he would look for Natabre. She was everything to him. His eyes heavily drifted to his left, hoping that she had risen, but nothing. Same to his right, with the same unsatisfying result. Anakin leaned back against a rock and wrapped his arms around his torso, an embrace for himself. The last bit of energy he had, after having given everything to those who needed it most, found itself encircling his body. As he bent over, tightening his grip, he heard his name. Anakin's eyes opened, and he looked up, to nothing. As he started to believe that he was losing his mind, the voice came again, and he looked into the apparition of Qui-Gon Jinn. The former instructor was kneeling down before Anakin, smiling. He asked Anakin if he trusted the Force. Skywalker responded, but it trailed off. He did, but how could he anymore? All he did was put his faith into it, and he had only been rewarded with loss. Qui-Gon nodded his head. It was a difficult path, he remarked, but a difficult path forges those who are most deserving of its rewards. The Force is guiding him to something more. Maybe it can't be seen in the shadow of the night. Maybe it can't be felt in the heartache of what had been lost, but it existed. Qui-Gon reached his hand out, as if he could physically console the boy he promised to train, and told Anakin to trust in himself. His future had not been written. He would see it someday, and he would rejoice in knowing he stayed true to himself. Qui-Gon told Anakin to keep pushing. The gift of the Force would reveal itself. Anakin placed his hand over Qui-Gon's, and he would fall asleep embracing an apparition that gave him a new sense of direction and even understanding. Back at the listening post on Zaheth, Bastila sat with her face hidden under the dark cloak. Imperial troopers were plugging information into data logs of everything they were picking up on. An aspect of Bastila's face that remained hidden was a scar that covered the left side of her cheek. It was deep, too. She then raised her hand as Vaylin quickly turned backwards. Everyone in the room was listening to different calls in the area. Then everything transformed into a singular distress signal. The code wasn't something that could be identified, but they were able to, by using this long-range communication array, learn that the Jedi home at Ahch-To had been attacked. At long last, the Sith had a location to search for, but it turns out their need to hunt wasn't even warranted. The Jedi had destroyed themselves by turning the Republic against them. Vaylin smiled and quickly moved to inform her father, but Bastila gripped her wrist and shook her head. The time for that would come later. Now, they had to pack up. Bastila had noticed something that no one else had. The giddiness of knowing that the Republic openly attacked their Jedi counterparts sent everyone into a frenzy of excitement. Bastila overheard an officer address the code, spying on their call, recognizing that the station at Zaheth had been turned back on. While the usefulness of the station didn't see much production, it wasn't the quantity, but the quality of what the Sith had learned here today. The Jedi and Republic were at odds. For someone as intelligent as Lady Bastila, this was a sign that a wrinkle could be thrown into the Jedi ranks and disrupt everything for them. She smiled and led her Praetorian guard out of the chamber, as Vaylin quickly gathered up everything she could inside the facility. They would all escape Zaheth before the closest Republic fleet arrived at the system. When the morning regrettably found Octu, the Jedi were being escorted away. They were now again without a home. They were betrayed by their ally, the Republic. No one felt safe with clone troopers or Republic officers. Many of the adult Jedi were able to at the very least recognize that they had to maintain something with the Republic, but the younger Jedi couldn't fathom such a relationship continuing to exist. They had been betrayed. They needed to disappear and let the galaxy fend for itself. The Jedi Council, including Skywalker and Rancisis, were able to speak with other masters around the galaxy. Mace's instruction for his peers was to keep steady. The war was reaching a breaking point. He sensed a disturbance that would rupture lines. Something was coming. He promised to meditate on these premonitions or feelings. The Council was instructed to send Jedi out to search for a new and hidden home. For the time being, until otherwise requested by another counselor, Anakin and Rancisis would remain with the younglings as they were transported to a new home. Windu was very aware of what Skywalker had been doing for the children on Octu. He saw Anakin's placement with those Jedi as necessary for their cause for the time being. Across the galaxy, inside the galactic core, was the Sith Emperor. He sat silently with his eyes closed, listening to the air swim around him until the door creaked open before him. Valkorin's eyes flipped, and he smiled at the individual. Zala had come far to meet him, thanks to Lord Ragnos. They had much to discuss. Unlike his typical approach to Jedi or servants, he rose to his feet and descended the stairs to meet her on an even level. He could sense her terror, and he told her not to worry. They were safe here, much safer than she would have been at her home. Zala asked what he meant, and he stumbled over his words apologetically. He thought she knew. She demanded to know what she didn't know right now. What did he do? And he placed his hand on her shoulder and leaned over so that their eyes could meet evenly. His eyebrows raised from the center of his face, giving off a confused and worried, fatherly expression. Valkorin told her that the Republic attacked the Jedi at Ahch-To. Early reports were suggesting that clones and Republic officers championed this moment. He believed that her dear friend Anakin Skywalker had died in the attack. Zala started to breathe heavier, as if she were having an asthma attack. Valkorin held her back, telling her that she would be alright. She heaved, stumbling over her feet, as her head sped back and forth with no true direction. A few tears slipped down her face as she asked the Sith Emperor how this was possible. Valkorin lowered his head shamefully, telling her that greed existed within the Republic for centuries. It's why the Sith were always at war with them. The Jedi sadly couldn't see their path, always aligning with the government that sought power and pleasure over duty to the galaxy. Zala tried to think of questions to respond with, to try and remind Valkorin of his actions in genocide across the galaxy, but before she could ask a single question, he told her assertively that the Republic officers and their clone armies sought to steal from the Jedi. A weapon held by them, won by their greatest warriors, is what the Republic wanted. Natabre and Anakin's sacrifices would be swallowed whole by the Republic war machine. They would seize the Star Forge, kill every star in the galaxy, and create a military so vast that it could level everything. He asked if that was what she wanted, if her masters would want that pain to envelop the galaxy. Zala shook her confused head, wiping a tear from her eye with her sleeve. Valkorin pulled a handkerchief and wiped her eyes for her, telling his child that she would be okay. He placed his hand on her back and told her to walk with him. If she could tell him where the Star Forge was, they could destroy it and stop the Republic from enslaving the galaxy. He asked that she not let them waste a moment. The dogs of war would be coming for their power. With the Jedi out of the way, there was nothing stopping the greed of the Republic. Zala raised her head to the Sith Emperor as they entered a separate chamber. She promised Valkorin that she would do everything within her power to avenge her masters. He smiled, nodding in agreement. He knew she would. And that, my friends, is episode 1 of season 4 of the Sith Clone Wars. Special thanks to all of you guys. I'm super psyched for this season to be back. Got 9 more exciting episodes. It's gonna get crazier. This is probably my favorite season yet. And I think I say that every season, but this season is absolutely insane. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed episode 31 or episode 1 of season 4. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.